So I'm Christina Simons and I'm a documentary photographer. I've been a photographer around 20 years or so. No, I've lived here for 20 years. I've married an Australian. I have a little Australian son, and I've basically built my life here, but I'm half American and I'm half Icelandic. Well, initially, we were here in Victoria, and um, it was school holidays. It's just this side of the New Year. So, my son was going to daycare, and he couldn't go in to daycare because the air was filled with smoke, and there was a dense kind of haze all throughout the city, and we weren't next to or even close to the fires, but it impacted us because the air quality was so poor. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this must be really bad. And it wasn't more than a few days later I got sent up to an area called Bairnsdale in Victoria for the New York Times, that I started shooting that area, and specifically a woman who was caring for animals in that area and what she did to rescue those animals. She threw them in a truck, and she drove her truck away from the fires as fast as she could, as many animals as she could gather, and then called her friend on the way and said, you need to make space for these animals. And this woman just cleared out her lounge room. And I ended up going to this woman's lounge room and taking photos of kangaroos inside her lounge that this woman had recovered. And that was the beginning of it. And then I was assigned again to the Kangaroo Island fires, which was happening, within a few weeks. It was pretty close to each other. And for that was just an awful, awful fire. It killed around, I think all the fires together killed around 30 people, and millions of animals and wildlife and natural forest land, as well as, property. And I remember I had to get on a Hercules to fly over the Flinders Chase National Park. And as I was flying over, I could see like patches of brown, and then bigger patches of brown and some smoke. And then we just cleared into the national park, and it was black as far as the eye could see. And I remember having a physical response, like a tingles all down my body and just this heartbreak as I was taking photos, because that's my job, just going, oh my God, it's gone. It's just gone. And I remember feeling the deep grief that comes with realizing such profound loss. In Kangaroo Island, I spent a lot of time with people who owned hundreds and thousands of sheep that had been had perished. I'd seen animals that had perished. You could see them in pairs, mother and child that had perished in the ground together as the blaze of heat had pushed through at such a rate that they couldn't escape it through running. It was absolutely heartbreaking. I mean, land itself, represented, in a way, the national parks represented the home of all the wildlife. And then you can only imagine how much wildlife had gone with it. And then we were lucky enough to go into the triage tent where they were trying to look after the animals that had been affected. And I say look after, some of them needed to be euthanized. Some of them actually were able to recover. I went with the Humane Society to go rescue some animals. And basically the policy that they were going through was literally like looking around for animals and then trying to pick them up both safely, but also like, they have claws so that they could be, the staff can be injured, so that pick them up safely and try and bring them back to this triage tent at the wildlife center there. And it was just incredible to see, how badly injured the animals were, but also how heartbreaking it was for the staff. And then you had them, looking after them in the triage tent and, making these really painful decisions of euthanizing them. But, the path to recovery wouldn't have been, without a lot of complications, and therefore the kindest thing is to let them go. But it was just seeing how it affected the people, the community, how it affected the staffing. And then for me, what was really interesting was in March, so, the fires happened in December, January. In March, I went back to Kangaroo Island with the big issue, and there was this sort of hope that was starting to blossom. And only 3 months later, I'm really privileged and glad I got to go because, of course, after that, COVID happened and we were not able to visit, much as I would have liked to continue to come and go. But what I saw was the rebuilding of it and the hope. And we even got to release this gorgeous little koala named Grumpy, because he wasn't very friendly when people came around, into the wild back, having recovered after 3 months of being, looked after. So there was this sense of hope and recovery, but it still was really, really badly damaged. As you say, you'd been there a year later and you were really struck by how bad it was. But I remember seeing these trees with little bits of growth coming back on them and thinking, okay, let's start again.